All right. Good afternoon. This is Mrs. Blake from Allen High School, and we're here today to interview Jerry Kasten. And we're going to go ahead and start off, Jerry, with a few basic questions. First, what is your full name?
Jerry Kasten.
All right.
Actually, Jerome, but I go by Jerry.
Okay. Where and when were you born?
I was born in the Bronx, New York.
Okay.
That'd be December of 1932.
All right. And what current city and state do you live in?
Dallas, Texas.
All right. Who were your parents, and what were their occupations?
My parents were immigrants from Eastern Poland and that area, which changed hands quite often, with Russia taking over parts of Poland many times. So sometimes it was called Russia-Pole. And they came to this country in 1911, just before World War I. And things were getting hot over in Europe, building forces and so on. And so they, like a lot of immigrants, came to this country at that time.
Okay.
My father was a poultryman. His specialty was chickens. And growing up in a shtetl, if you ever saw Zero Mostel in Fifth on the Roof, it's that kind of a
I know exactly what you're talking about.
village that they grew up in. And my father was glad to leave there. They didn't speak much of their life there, because it was all negative, and they came to the United States to start a new life. So my two older brothers and myself are firstborn Americans, and we're just thankful that they came to this country.
Excellent, excellent. Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have 3 children, twin girls and a boy, and we have 5 grandchildren right now. They all live in this area, Dallas area.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
My 2 older brothers, I know sisters, my 2 older brothers passed away. One about a year and a half ago, and the other one about a year ago.
Okay. And what were their names? And I mean, obviously they were brothers, so what were their names?
Well, Reuben was my oldest brother. He was 90 when he died. He was a World War II veteran, and found out a lot of things about him. His war record, after he died, reading the information that was provided at the funeral, I wasn't aware of, that he had served in North Africa, in Europe, and then the Pacific. So
That's incredible.
yeah, he thought he was on his way home, but when he was going through the Panama Canal, he realized he was bypassed New York. My other brother served in the Navy. He was aviation radioman, radio operator on a patrol plane, PBY, patrolling the Gulf of Mexico looking for German submarines during World War II.
That's fantastic. Wow, that's exciting. And again, like you said, that they had served in the military. We're going to get to our military basics here. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I was a high school dropout for a period of time. I was working at different odd jobs. I tried to enlist when I turned 17. That was before the Korean War started. And they told me at the time that it was because of my poor eyesight, that they wouldn't take me.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, thinking about it, maybe it was because I didn't have a high school diploma. That could have been it too. But in any case, that was before the war started. Then months after the Korean War started, I got a postcard from the recruiting office saying that their standards have changed. And that if I was still interested, that I could apply. I was not interested. But by that time, I joined the National Guard. And I was in the National Guard for 3 years and 9 months, and went to an Army Reserve unit because I got interested in photography, and this reserve unit had an opening for a photographer. And it was there that the major in charge of the unit, it's a psychological warfare unit, propaganda unit, where they publish propaganda leaflets, and they needed a photographer for that purpose. And in any case, he said, you need to have more professional training than you have. You take good pictures, but that's... So anyway, he talked me into going into the Army Photography School for 4 months. So to activate for 4 months and go to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, across the river.
You said it was Fort what, New Jersey?
Fort Monmouth,
Fort
New
Monmouth,
Jersey.
okay.
Yeah, it's no longer exists, but just a city park now. But it was a big communications training unit where they taught radar and all kinds of things, signal corps, including photography. And I got a very good, excellent training in photography during those 4 months, and I did very well. And by the time I got back, I was promoted to sergeant in the reserve unit, and that's where I ended up as far as wanting to learn photography. I did, but when I tried to get jobs in New York City as a photographer, it was very difficult because people with more of experience, I had no experience professionally, and they couldn't get jobs, let alone myself. So I decided I would activate and enlist for 2 years, which I was able to do at the time for 2 years, and get some hands-on experience in the Army as a photographer.
Okay. And what had, I mean, since a child, had it been something that you'd always aspired to want to do, just out of pique curiosity, or, you know, I mean, originally when I asked, you said photography seemed something that interests you. What, you know, prior to, what was the desire to want to get into photography?
Mother of a friend of mine in the neighborhood, she befriended me, and for my birthday, she threw a birthday party. My parents were having problems, marital problems, and so my home life was not the best at the time. And anyway, she set up a surprise birthday party and gave me as a camera as a gift. And it wasn't nothing very expensive, but to me, it was just something that I didn't think I would have. And she happened to be a secretary who worked for a photography magazine in downtown Manhattan, New York. And she took some of my photographs that I had taken and showed them around her office, and some of the people there thought that they were fairly good. And so she gave me some emotional uplift, you know, by passing that on, and I got more interested in it.
That's great.
So I just started photography. I had a little bit of a knack, you know, as far as creativity and composition of photographs, but I didn't have the, you know, the lighting and all the other things that go into it set down until I went to the school.
Until you got the formal training, yeah. And that was in the Army when you really began to see that training, or was it the training that was actually, you know, prior to? Because you talked about going into the school.
The school at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, was the basic, you know, was like basic training in a sense of the photography. But then when I activated and enlisted for 2 years, I already had my MOS, my job, which was photographer. So I had to go through basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. We called it Fort Leonard Wood, Misery. And then I was shipped to Korea and was just assigned as a photographer.
And what year was that?
Pardon me?
What year was that?
That was well, at the end of 54. By the Christmas, we had celebrated Christmas on board the ship. It was a very slow ship out of Seattle to Sasebo, Japan, to Incheon, Korea, and it took almost 2 weeks. And so we actually landed, I believe, on New Year's Day, January 55.
Okay.
And
so all your formidable education years were during the Korean War, shortly before it, and so the training, the enlistment, and everything was during that process of getting to a point where you could actually go to Korea.
Yeah, I had actually gone back to school
Okay.
and finished and got a high school diploma
Oh, good for you.
before I enlisted, before I got to that point.
Did they recommend it, or was it a personal choice?
No, it's just, well, what happened was my oldest brother, I was working at the time, and I was on my lunch break, and I was going back to the store where I was working. It was a photography store. And so my oldest brother, who was a New York City policeman, and he saw me in the street. He said, why aren't you in school? And because he was living, he got married and was living away from home. He didn't know that I had dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
And my other brother was moved to Texas, and he was going to school in Texas College after World War II. So in any case, he talked me into going. He says, you need that high school diploma. Of course, now they say you need the college diploma.
Mm-hmm.
But back then it was, he said high school diploma. So he took me back to his school, because at that point there was some law in New York that the principal of a high school didn't have to take it back if you had gotten up to a certain age after being dropped out.
Right.
And the first school he took me to wouldn't take me, and then he went back to his school, high school that he had graduated. And the fact that he was wearing a police uniform when he took me in there
was a rite of passage.
it helped.
Right.
So in any case, I'm glad he did that, of course, and I didn't appreciate it too much at the time, but I did afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, so then when I went to Korea, that's when I really got hands-on experience in photography, as a photographer.
Okay. Looking back at some of your, we had a discussion before. You mentioned I had made a phone call to you at one point, and you had given me your description about what it was that you did, and you talked about processing photographer at one point. And can you describe in what detail did what you did play in the role during the war? I guess you had mentioned at one point about the leaflet propaganda and the processing photographer. What is a leaflet propaganda exactly?
Well, it was the 351st L&L company, loosely, what's it called? Loudspeaker and Leaflet Company.
Okay.
And they actually, in later years when I was in Korea, there was a situation where there were many South Korean people objecting to the presence of United Nations people in South Korea. This is after the Korean War. And so they had to set up barriers at the entrances to the military compounds. Mm-hmm. And there was they brought up a tank with loudspeakers on it, and it happened to be a loudspeaker and leaflet company. That's part of psychological warfare. And so somebody got on a microphone and then in Korean would speak to them and try to calm down the crowd and whatever. Now, when I was in that reserve unit, we didn't really produce anything. I was in there just a short period of time, and it was mainly bookwork training. And so he was trying to upgrade the technical abilities of each of the members of the unit, and that's why he suggested I go to that photography school, so that if they were ever activated, that I would, have the ability to operate the cameras and so on.
Now, was the leaflet propaganda program going on during the war, or was it encouraged after to continue to keep boosting the morale of the purpose of why Americans still are here, or how long did the leaflet propaganda program or loudspeaker program actually exist?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I wasn't really part of that.
Okay.
What experience I had in that reserve unit, that was, I believe that would be after the 53. That may have been after the war had already ended, or whatever, but that unit was a reserve unit, and they weren't activated, so.
Okay, so like you said, you hadn't.
So
been
I
in
really
very
don't
long.
have any experience with
Okay.
with that aspect of it.
So then once you were actually there, in Korea, what would you call like your unit or your group or, the faculty of which you were belonged to? What was that essentially?
Well, it was a photo detachment, a photo unit as part of photographers, photographers and lab processors and so on. Everybody was taught as a photographer how to process film,
Mhm.
how to develop print, and so on. So you never knew exactly what your assignment might be. It might be a photographer, it might be, even though you're labeled as a photographer, it might be you were stuck in a lab developing and printing pictures all the time, never taking any photographs.
Okay.
So there's a story about that, how I got the particular job that I got on the troop ship going over. I noticed that there was a corporal whose job it was to put out the ship's newspaper, and they gave him a little room to him, a little cabin to himself with his mimeograph machine and whatever else he had to do to produce the paper. And he had it easy. Everyone else had to sleep in a bunk with 5 high in there and on the ship, and it wasn't very comfortable. And so also it was a very slow ship that didn't cut through the water, just rolled with the waves, and everybody was getting nauseous and going up on deck and checking up their stuff. And it was really it was truly a slow boat to China, but instead it went to Korea. And so I found out that when I got to Korea, and I got to the unit, it was on a Sunday, and the fellows who had already been there on duty were in the Quonset hut, and I showed them a photograph that was in a newspaper, the Pacific Stars and Stripes, that I had picked up on board ship, and it showed an Army photographer getting kissed on the cheek by Marilyn Monroe, and because she had been there to entertain the troops a few months before Christmas. And so they said that fellow was the photographer in their unit, and he was called the VIP photographer, which meant very important people. He would photograph when they came to Korea. And now that the war was over, they were allowing certain people to come to Korea, newspaper people and influential people. So you always had visiting generals and Secretary of the Army and sometimes the Pope, or all kinds of people were beginning to come to South Korea and visit the troops and so on. And so the photograph showed Marilyn Monroe kissing this photographer on the cheek, and he's going, "Woo," like that. And it was a put-up photograph, but it was a very good one, and won some prizes. And they said that he was the VIP photographer, and that he had left about a week or two before to go back to the States. And there was an opening for a VIP photographer. So Monday morning, the next morning, I and about 5 or 6 other newly arrived photographers sat out in the hallway of the officer in charge of the unit to be interviewed for our assignments. So I was called in and stood before the officer in charge, and he's looking through my papers, I suppose. And he said, "Sergeant Kasten, I see that you were stationed at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey." Of course, that's where I went to photography school. And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "What was your job there?" So that told me that he didn't know that I went to school there. He just had the location of where I was. He didn't have what I was doing
Right, what the
there.
assignment was.
So I said, "Well, sir, I lied through my teeth and I said, I was a VIP photographer. And he says, well, it so happens we have an opening. I said, is that right, sir? And so anyway, I got the job with a warning and said, you better do a good job because you're going to be dealing with generals, and if they're not happy, you're going to be out of that job.
Wow.
And in a photo lab slopping chemicals or something.
Right.
So anyway, that's the job I had for the rest of the time I was in Korea.
That's fantastic. Wow. That's an amazing story.
Sometimes you have to lie to get a job.
It's the one that you want. Some questions I wanted to ask you about your experience while in Korea. What type of equipment actually were you either required to, or did you choose to carry on every assignment?
Well, the official camera then, that's before 35 millimeter cameras came into professional use. The life photographers were using them, but in the military they were using the same photographers that journalists were using, photojournalists were using all around the world, and that's the 4 by 5 inch speed graphic, and what we call the press camera.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big bulky unit. It folds up, and it has bellows on
Accordion.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And a flash bracket, the flash gun bracket you put on the side. And then I would always, converted a gas mask back. They gave you a case, like a fiber board case to carry all this equipment, which you really couldn't carry around. It was too bulky. So I converted a gas mask bag to put extra film and bulbs in, flash bulbs in. Always carried that with me. And they also had film pack. The film you normally would use had 2 sides of a holder, one piece of film on each side. So you would take a photo, put it in, take the slide out, take your picture, put the slide back to block the light, take it out, turn it over, and do the same thing on the other side. You had 2 photographs. But if you had film pack, which was thinner film, and it was in a pack that slid in, and you had, I can't remember, it was 10 or 12 photographs, shots, and you just pulled the tabs, and each time you pulled the tab, the film moved around.
Okay.
So that was a lot faster,
Mm-hmm.
but you had to be careful, that everything was done right, otherwise light might get in there or something. But so it was a pretty, by modern standards, it was a pretty archaic system. Then it had to get, every photograph that you took had to have a caption. You carried a caption book with you, wrote down the information, the date, where it was taking place, what was in the photograph, if there are people in it, left to right, who were they, what were their ranks and everything. You had to get all this information. Now, what that did, it gave me some writing experience, because then you want to make it interesting in the caption.
Right.
So you had a little story there. And then if you took a series of photographs over a certain event, you end up doing a picture story. So you can submit a larger caption, so you're actually doing a little bit of writing in addition to your photography.
Okay.
So I enjoyed that because, especially if I can get them, if they would, when I turned them in, if they put them together and made a story out of it, my caption, my story was in it, so
Okay.
that I had written.
Excellent. Was the equipment that you had issued by the government, or did you find sometimes that you had to buy additional equipment out of pocket?
Well, the only thing it was all provided by the government. Eventually, while I was there, I bought the Japanese came out with these more modern cameras, and they would go into the post exchanges, the PXs, before they reached the consumer market back in the States. So I did buy a Japanese Leica, Japanese Nikon, I should say, but as far as developing and so on and so forth, I had to, and prints, I had to do that all on my own, and then none of that became official photographs.
Okay.
That was just sideline.
All right.
Was specialized equipment used for different assignments? You know, I know that you had talked about the bulk of that seemed almost impossible, and again, the archaic style of the film and taking the pictures. But did you ever end up having to bring any other type of specialized equipment used for different assignments?
No, you just had to adapt, use that same equipment and adapt.
Especially if I didn't mean to interrupt you, but especially like I guess kind of like if you were more mobile in some cases, that you may have to kind of ration and think what you have versus, well, okay, I'm going to be I'm going to be somewhere where there's a more proper setting, and I may have to bring different types of equipment to make adjustments based on, you know, did you find that you had to think before you walked out what it is that you were bringing with you? And
well,
you know.
I just carried the basics because
Mm-hmm.
you never knew what it was going to be like when you got to where you were going. And part of the time, a large part of the time, I had no idea what it would look like when I got there. Whether it would be dark, light, whether it would be indoors, outdoors. I mean, I never knew. A good example was that the situation with the mines, if I can bring that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
This picture right here. What happened was I walked into the office coming back from one assignment, and the major of the public, in charge of the public information office that I was attached to at 8th Army headquarters in Seoul, he said, get your gear and go down to the chopper pad. And I didn't know what the assignment was or anything. So I had my camera, okay, in its case, and then my bag with my equipment, my flash bulbs, and film pack in there. And that's always what I carried. And so I got to the chopper pad, and here's this big old helicopter with a bunch of guys in it, and its rotors are going, and it's very noisy and everything. And they said, "Come on in, we got to go." And I jumped in the helicopter and sat down, and both doors on each side were open, so you got all the noise coming through. And I never did know until we got to where we were going what the assignment was. And so the helicopter never touched down, it just hovered, and we had to jump out, and so I was taking a picture of whatever was going on. And I could see, first of all, the tail rotor was almost hitting me, and I couldn't stand up in this rice field without this rotor going around on the tail about to hit me. So I yelled at them to cut the rotor off. They don't need that when they're just hovering.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did that, and then they moved forward, and these other fellows jumped out, and there's a bomb lying right there that hadn't gone off during the war. And they this harness that they had put on the bottom of the helicopter. And during the process, by yelling back and forth to these fellows, and these fellows got back into the chopper, and they were about to take off, and I'm there by myself. And they said, "By the way, there's mines all around. Don't move. We'll be back soon." So what happened, I mean, I found out a lot of this afterwards. And historically, this was the first time in history that a live bomb had been evacuated by a helicopter.
Wow.
And the reason was because there was a village nearby. This was up north, and there were minefields around in case the North invaded again, and North Koreans. And they found this bomb stuck in the mud from the war, and they were afraid children would come over from the nearby village and blow themselves up. So they evacuated it. And I stood around. I had nothing else to do but stand around and wait for the plane to come back. And you know it came back because I'm here. But I was very, very leery, and I couldn't walk around very far because there was
Right.
mines
You had
out
no
there, and
idea,
I didn't know where
right.
they were.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not, they removed some of the mines in order to give them room around the bomb, but the reason they didn't remove more was that they were in the mud. It was cold and thick mud, and they were afraid to try to dig them out and blow themselves up.
Right.
So this is what happened, and they took off, and that goes to what I was saying about you never know what you're going to get for an
Right.
assignment.
Absolutely. So, let me just here. Well, that's an incredible story, and just to even imagine to be around that in the midst of all that, I would have just been mortified to say, "We'll come back and get you." That's crazy. So, a lot of times when you arrive to your destination, what did you do to assess or analyze your environment to know how to capture the right image? When you arrived to your destination, what did you do to assess or analyze your environment to know how to capture the right image?
Oh, well, it depended what the assignment was. I mean, what it turned out to be, it was just a matter of just being quick and creative on the go. Like it's a photojournalist is what it is.
Right.
And photojournalist, you don't pose people. You don't have time for that, and you're not supposed to pose people. But that's why when these people do selfies nowadays, I just can't stand it. You know, that's not photography to me. But in any case, you just have to assess the situation and just use your knowledge.
Right. Mm-hmm. And did one of the questions I was going to ask you too is looking at some of your images too, some of the amazing photographs. Some seem to be a little bit more casual than others. You know, I mean, obviously there were moments where you either were, taking images with, people coming off of planes, or you're taking, images where, of the orphans and so forth. Were you able to view the image with a creative aspect? I mean, that clearly falls into the category of analyzing the situation.
Yeah,
or did the government, like you said, government may have given you an assignment, but did you ever find yourself thinking as you're going, as you're headed towards your assignment, all right, kind of thinking in your own mind how you're going to assess the situation, what elements may be there, almost kind of placing scenarios in your head to prepare yourself for what maybe you would be expecting?
Well, I learned as I went along also, you can never be fully prepared for everything. For example, the first time I went to an airport arrival, which was sort of typical because we had dignitaries coming and going all the time. This general gets promoted and he's leaving, and a new one's coming in, so he and his wife come in, and this one's leaving. They meet at the airport, and there's an honor guard, and there's a ceremony and a parade at the airport, and so they're sort of standard kind of things. But then the first time I had that assignment, there were other photographers there, from news sources and reporters and so on, Korean and Japanese and so on. And this one Korean fellow, remember him, he always wore a beret, and he was short, and he was a photographer. And what happened was there's a line, they put a tape down, and you're not supposed to go past that line. And in order to keep people from jamming up and getting in the way of the dignitaries who are coming off the plane. And so he was a short fellow, and I got into a good spot so I can get a shot of the people walking down the steps off the plane. And all of a sudden, this fellow nudges his way through and sort of gets in front of me and pushes me back. And so I got my picture, but I didn't get the angle that I was trying to get because he was in the way. I had to move around him to get my picture, and I almost didn't get it. And I would have been in trouble with the general if I hadn't. So next time we went to the airport, I saw him there. He's always there. And this time, I was ready for him. And so I stood in my spot, and when he came over close to me, and I took and I'm big, and he's just a short fellow. I took my right foot and I stepped it right on his foot. I just jammed my foot down on his foot, and I took my picture when he was yelling or screaming or in pain, whatever, and he never bothered me again. So
That's using that force to get what it is that you need. That's a pretty cool story. Did you ever have anyone with you on your assignments?
Anyone?
Did you ever have anyone go along with you on your assignments as assistants?
Yeah, sometimes a writer.
Okay.
I was attached to this public information office.
Okay.
Now it's called public affairs. And sometimes I would go with a writer.
Okay.
Who was doing a story. For example, the orphanage. And Lieutenant Balding, he wrote the story about it. And he accompanied the general's wife, who was a supporter of these orphanages, and we went out and took photographs that day of 3 different orphanages in the Seoul area.
Okay.
And so it didn't happen often, but most of the time I was on my own taking photographs, but there were times I would go with a writer.
Was the camaraderie really positive? Was the camaraderie between you and the people that you went along with, pretty positive? Or
Yeah,
did they
we
seem
worked out of the same office, and I got along
so you
with
knew.
everyone. There's a funny situation. When I first arrived in Korea, this photograph right here shows me when I first arrived. I don't even know who took the photograph. I think I gave my camera to someone and had someone take my picture. But this was the Jeep that was assigned to me, and I had my parking space right there where it says no parking, so no one else would park there. And I was guaranteed use of that Jeep. It was mine. No one else had they had to go to carpools and order Jeeps, like a taxi. But because I was on 24-hour call, I might get an assignment that would last till I'd have to go to the lab myself, develop my own pictures if the lab had closed and so on, type up the captions and record everything, and I might not get back to go to bed till 2 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, wow.
But then I didn't have to get up the next morning if I didn't have an assignment.
Right.
So I didn't have to do any duties, no guard duty, no physical education or physical training or anything. But in any case, when I first arrived at the Public Information Office, I couldn't believe what I saw. I walked in, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Don't Go Near the Water. It's about the Navy. It was a farce about the similar type of unit, but in the Navy. And in any case, this PFC was yelling at a major. And he had golf clubs over his shoulder, a golf bag over his shoulder. And it turns out that he was in competition for a golf tournament, U.S. Army golf tournament. And he was supposed to go play. And the major wanted him to stay and finish writing an article. And he's yelling at the major. They said, "No, you can't make me do that. I've got to go." And he took off and walked away. And I just couldn't believe that the PFC or whatever he was, PFC or corporal, could talk to an officer like that and get away with it. But that's the way it was.
Yeah. Did you? How did the government decide on what photographs they would select based on the thousands of images you took? How would the government decide on what photographs that? I mean, ultimately, I knew that the government sent you on an assignment, but you obviously took many frames of, many pictures of that particular incident. What would make them decision?
I would never know where the original. I could just guess, but I would never know. It wasn't my business to ask or be concerned. I was just simply concerned with the assignment and doing it,
right,
and doing it well. But I would never know how an assignment was originated. where it came from. It just, that just information wasn't provided.
Okay. So it just was, here's the assignment, go do it.
Yeah,
And,
I would get the assignment. I had
fulfill
a
your
big black
requirement.
chalkboard in that room that they gave me up in the public information office, and the assignments were there, or sometimes they'd get called in and someone give me a piece of paper and said,
Mhm.
go, so on.
Okay, all right. On the images that you took, were there any symbols or numbers that were used to conceal the identity of the pictures? Were there any special codes or anything on there that that government needed to to be able to use to document or to inventory, or is there anything on any of the pictures that were used to conceal the identity?
I don't know. I wouldn't be aware of it. There, some photographs I knew that I was taking for use by, what do they call it? Not criminal intelligence, but intelligence information, like the new insignia of Chinese officer or Chinese reporter at the Panmunjom up in the on the DMZ for their file or whatever. I never knew what they were going to do with that.
So when you were given orders to take photographs of insignias or
faces of people, certain
Okay.
people, so they can have for their file or whatever they're going to do with them.
Mhm.
But so I took the picture, and I took the photograph, but I never saw the prints.
Okay, and so and I had asked the question too about interrogation, and you don't know if any of the images that you had taken were used for interrogation purposes either, were you?
No.
Okay, like
No,
you said,
this was
your
after the
sons.
war.
Okay.
They were for record purposes or publishing purposes,
Okay.
for publicizing, for in some cases, in the case of a couple of cadavers who were soldiers who were killed, murdered. People had weapons, and some people got into arguments and fights, just like in civilian life, and there were court cases, and so I had to go to the graves registration, the morgue, as they called it, and take photographs of the bodies, and which I hated to do. And most of the time, I wouldn't even look at the bodies. I would just set the camera at a certain distance to make sure that's in focus between this point and that point. And I just walk around and take photographs of the body without even looking at it, whether bullet holes went in, when they came out, and all that sort of thing. I did that a couple of times.
Okay. Were any of the images that you took viewed by Korean civilians? Did any of the images that you took, were they viewed by Korean civilians?
Yeah, they're published in the newspapers,
Okay.
Korean newspapers. Not just I never knew where they were going to be used. I mean, they were made available by the Public Information Office. They might send copies. I had nothing to do with where the photographs went, but I did see at various times where they came out in Korean English language newspapers and Korean language newspapers in Seoul area, in the Army Times, in the Pacific Stars and Stripes, and there was also a TINE publication. It's over there somewhere, but it's a chart, and in order to keep soldiers up on world affairs, there were soldiers who were sort of in charge of spreading current events around. And they would go to different units, and they'd open up this chart and put it up on an easel like this. And on this display, you had, I can get one if you want,
Okay, we can put this on pause real quick.
instead of just waving my arms around. And this is an example. And they would either come around personally and they would gather a number of the troops together. It was a sort of a break from their workday, and for about a half hour or so, and talk to them about some of the things, or else they'd simply put this up on a bulletin board.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's
Do you want us to post that on there right quick? We can put it up here.
well,
If you wanted to see it, or you
this
just
is
wanted
one
to see it.
photograph of mine. This fellow here was trying to get into the Olympics.
Jerry, pull it up a little bit more so I can see. There you go. There you go. Yeah, perfect.
And
Perfect.
he was trying to get into the Olympics. And the Army and the military forces, you're not restricted from trying out for the Olympics. They have various competitions in the military every year. And if you're good enough, you can, go from there to try out for an Olympic team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he was trying to do on the decathlon. And at the time, me being the VIP photographer, the president of the Olympic Committee, Avery Brundage, came to Seoul, Korea, and to check out some of these people. And so we went through a photo session while Mr. Brundage was in town, and took photographs of this fellow here.
All right.
And I don't think he ever made the Olympic team. But he did well, but I'm sure I would have heard if he had made the Olympic team.
Right.
But he was trying.
Okay.
So anyway, that's the type of thing that, and these photographs come from various sources, not all from military photographers, but so it's always, I always felt honored if my photographs actually went into print. Most of the time, I never knew, what happened to them.
Right. So when you did see them and they were out there for, everyone else too, or, they made it back to the States and people were able to see it, then that was definitely a treat.
Yeah.
So, okay. I'll pull you back into focus here. Okay. Get the top of here. There we go. Okay. On the, one of the other questions I wanted to ask is, we talked about, the Korean civilians viewing your pictures. Did you feel that that some of the images that were out there that you took would help to win the hearts and minds of Korean civilians, or did you find sometimes that, when we're talking about propaganda, we're talking about images, taking photographs sometimes captures that feeling of hope, or that feeling of happiness, or that feeling of anger? Did you find sometimes that some of the images that you captured you felt would help win the hearts of Korean civilians, or anger the North Koreans,
Well, it depended what the assignment was or what the photographs were. For example, the set of photographs that I took at the orphanages, some of which appeared in Korean publication newspapers, I felt that they might feel more gratitude toward the Americans, because the American soldiers, or not just Americans, but United Nations soldiers, and every unit had adopted some orphanage somewhere in South Korea, and they were providing money to pay for food and so on to help keep those orphanages going. And so I know my unit, my photo unit, had adopted one of the orphanages, and that was the one that they would go around and ask for money once in a while to give to the orphanage. So I guess I didn't think much about it, but I felt that they probably were grateful for that.
Okay.
I would hope they would be.
And is the image that you have up here on the corner one of the images in the story that you could share with us about the experience?
Yeah, that was sad. It's just there was an orphanage set aside for children from orphan children who had some sort of debilitating or physical problems, and they were under medical care, or they were under recuperation, or training to get back into a normal life. In this case, this fellow had lost his hand, and I never knew what caused that, whether it was an explosive or something fell or how it happened. But this is in 1955, and so that's the war ended in 53, middle of 53. So it's possible that it happened during the war itself. I never knew. And he was one of a number of Korean children in this orphanage that had some sort of physical problem. But they were being helped. This fellow's learning how to write with that claw, whatever you call it, with a pen or a pencil, and seemed to be doing well doing that. And another one that I took, I recall, was he's learning how to walk again on two new legs.
Okay. And did you find, I know that considerable number of Americans adopted many Korean children. Did any of these images make it back to the States in hopes that the message would be passed along to try to, encourage Americans to adopt Koreans?
Well, the thing about it, as a photographer, I never knew where the pictures would end up.
Right.
And you couldn't think about it, because then you got to take more pictures the next time and so on, and you just keep going. You're doing your assignments. Mm-hmm. And once in a while, if I saw a photograph of mine in the Korean newspaper, an Army newspaper, or whatever, found out about it, it made me feel good, just. Mm-hmm. But you just you don't know. You just do your best, and it's not your job to publicize yourself or the photographs.
Right.
So I just tried to take the best photographs I could, under the circumstances. Mm-hmm. Now, can I tell you about this one?
Sure.
I'm ashamed of this one.
This is the propaganda one that we were talking about.
It was a set of photographs. They were trying to publicize the fact that they were now shipping before milk to South Korea.
I'm trying to move this down because there's a tad bit of a glare. In fact, I'm going to switch these and put this over there because I got a beautiful shot of that, and I'm just afraid that the glare is actually what's causing the problem. So I'm going to move this over a little bit. Hang on a second.
But in any case, they said we want you to take a set of photographs to show how milk comes to the soldiers in Korea. It comes by way of the States to Japan to Korea. So it's reconstituted milk, which means it's a powder form at one time, then you mix it with water or something. Anyway, by the time it reaches the consumers, it's milk, as far as we know, it. Well, I took a set of photographs showing the milk crates coming off of a LST from Japan to a train, and then from the train off to a trailer, a semi, and then it goes to the units, distributed to the units. And then I said, well, we need a couple of guys. We should have a couple of guys to finish the story. You should have a couple of guys in the field, who are enjoying this milk. So when I get to the place where these fellows are, these aren't field. Their boots are polished. Their pants are pressed.
I know.
There's no dirt on them. They just had a bath. I mean, this is not the field. This is just like they're waiting for a parade to start or something. So I couldn't do anything about it. I had to take it. That's all they gave me. So anybody who knows anything would just laugh at that and say, they're not out in the field. They're models.
Right.
They're models.
Oh,
and that's what they
funny.
were.
Yeah.
So I said, drink and smile, and I took the picture.
What were their reactions when
I
they
hated to do it. That's
right.
the kind of picture I hate to take. It's like a selfie picture. It's not news.
Right.
It was propaganda. That's the only propaganda picture I'm not saying none of the pictures that I took were not used for propaganda,
Right.
but as far as intentional, as far as I could tell, this is
Strictly.
the only one that was,
Mhm.
this set of photographs was meant to be.
When they were taking the picture, were they, I mean, because they're ultimately laughing, so something had to make them laugh. I don't know whether
Well,
they were
I
just,
said something to him. I
well,
don't
okay,
know.
I didn't know if it was something like, this is ridiculous, it's kind of poured it in, like, this
No,
is,
I-
it's not, or what, was it something
No, I
that they
said
were,
something, guys, won't you smile?
Uh-huh.
Or something, I don't know, I said something, I don't remember what.
Okay.
I don't know what, but I took it and that's it.
That's pretty funny. So that's a great story. Oh, okay. I'm gonna move this back to.
But I'm not in charge, so I couldn't grab the guys, There were probably a couple guys standing around watching and laughing who would have made better models than those two. They had dirt on themselves, so.
Did you? Well, obviously, with the war being over with, of all the moments that you've posed here, were there any additional memorable moments? While photographing that you can remember or you want to recall that you'd like to share? Anything memorabilia that you would like to?
Well, it probably was the most, what I call gut-wrenching assignment that I had. And that was, I had read we got the Army Stars and Stripes, Pacific Stars and Stripes, I should say, every day. And I read one day about one of our planes being shot down by North Korea. This was after the war. But the North Koreans were always very hostile. I had many assignments, a number of 6 or 7 different assignments up at Panmunjom where the peace talks and when the negotiations are held, if there's a dispute or something. They go in one door, we go in the other door, there's a line across the middle, you're not supposed to sit on the wrong side. I mean, you go up the steps, you're in North Korea, so it's the truce talk area. Anyway, the war is over, but there's many incidents. And so here I read in the paper about them shooting down one of our planes that came too close to the DMZ. Well, under the rules, if there's a plane, whether it's coming south or going north, that they're not supposed to shoot it down. They're supposed to try to communicate with it. They're supposed to talk it down or indicate to it it doesn't belong there, whatever. But no, they don't bother. They just shot it down. And what happened was one day in 2010, I get a call from this fellow in Alabama who was a member of a helicopter unit while I was there in Korea. And he says, I have some of your photographs that you took in Korea, and I'd like to put them in my book. So, and I'd like to find out what happened. And so this is the book that he's referring to, and the event, I'll tell you what happened, and this is what I call the gut-wrenching event, is that about 10 days after the plane was shot down, the North Koreans, who had up to that time refused to admit that they had shot down a plane, then they began to say it was a spy plane. And they shut it down because it was spying on North Korea. And we have proof to show that it was actually fired upon when it was in the demilitarized or neutral zone. But then when it crash landed in North Korea. So it was in violation of the rules that they fired. It wasn't fired upon in North Korea. It was fired upon in the DMZ. But anyway, they don't know what the rules are. So in any case, the plane was shot down. The pilot survived the crash with some head injuries, and the passenger was killed instantly when the shells hit the plane. This fellow from Alabama who wrote this book wrote a book about his unit, his helicopter unit. And one day he was driving to a nearby state or whatever, and he saw what looked like a plane that was shot up. It was actually a helicopter that was used in the process of evacuating this fellow from North Korea. But in any case, I was assigned about 10 days after the event to go up to North Korea and be the photographer of record for the U.S. Army of the return of the body and the return of the pilot. They agreed to exchange. And it wasn't until years later that we found out what the purpose of that flight was. We claimed at the time that it just went the wrong way. The pilot was new, he was going north and east, and it should have been going south and west, and so it was just a mistake. But we found out later that the reason they were up so close is we were fearful that the leader of South Korea, Syngman Rhee, had been wanting to attack North Korea. He wanted to get North Korea out of the picture and take over all of Korea and for him being the leader, being anti-communist and so on, and so we had to keep tight controls on him. And so what they would do was send out observer planes to watch his units, the army units of the South Korean army, to see where they were. And if they were getting too close to the north, then we could go over and try to talk those generals into bringing them back and so on. So the plane, years later we find out that the purpose of that plane was checking up on some of these South Korean units that were close to the DMZ. Well, getting back to my experience, I didn't know anything about that. All I knew was that I was going to be there for the Army. There were many other photographers there, and this shows some of the press corps, movie cameras, and so on that were here. And our people talking over here. Now, at first they wanted to bring the body in a box over first. What they were playing were what they call mind games. They knew we wanted the injured man first so that we could send him to the hospital. We had an evacuation helicopter waiting nearby. You can see his head bandage right here. And I was close enough, of course, to take the picture. I could see his face. I could see his one eye that wasn't bandaged, was sort of glossy or glassy-eyed. He was hurting. And they had done nothing to help him except put some clean-looking bandages on his head and put him in a gown or something, and but they didn't do anything to really help him. But in any case, we talked them into letting him be transferred first. And what happened was that this officer right here, below my finger, spoke perfect English, no accent whatsoever. And he began talking to him and asking questions about how well he was treated. Of course, the newspaper people all around, Associated Press and International News Service and Japanese newspapers and Korean and American, and taking all this in, and he was trying to spin this tale, how well they were treated and so on and so forth. And so he kept talking to the pilot, and the pilot, meanwhile, is trying to cross this railroad trestle to get over to safety and get on that helicopter to take him to Tokyo General Hospital. So as he's about to, he pauses in his questions, and the pilot's about to walk across, and he puts his arm up and holds him back. And I got very upset. I got angry at that. He asked another officer to open up this kerchief or cloth and in it was a wristwatch and a wallet and some keys, things that belonged to the pilot. He says, "Are these yours, or you got everything that we're giving? I want to make sure that we're giving everything back to you that belongs to you." And he's making a big deal out of this. Meanwhile, the pilot needs to go to the hospital. So I got very upset about this, and I, it was momentarily, but I really felt like I was going to hit him. Yeah. I would have lost, I don't know what would have happened, but probably would have been shot. Yeah. Because there were North Koreans with weapons all around. Mm-hmm. But in any case, he let him go, and then a helicopter took off with him, and about 2 minutes after that. And then they brought the casket forward across the trestle. And that's North Korea right there, and we're in supposedly a neutral zone. But they had troops in violation of the rules. They had troops all around with weapons.
Could you hold that image steady, Jerry, so I could actually show them? You can. There you go. That's a perfect. Yeah. And then I see the casket's there on that. Appears to look like on the shoulder. And okay, I see. And so that's a railroad tie. It's
a railroad trestle.
Okay.
A burned out railroad trestle.
Okay, and you said that there were North Korean soldiers all around.
Up in the hills.
Up in the hills.
In the hills, in violation of the rules. But it's done. Our officer in charge, an Air Force colonel, told us ahead of time that there would be those guys up there.
Okay.
They do it for propaganda purposes, to put us on edge and everything.
Right. Okay.
And so here he is, this Smiley right here. And I asked later.
Hold that up a little bit, Jerry, so I can see that. Thank you.
I asked later about this fellow because he spoke perfect English, and they said he had graduated Harvard. He had been to the United States, went to Harvard, came back to North Korea. He's a communist.
Unreal. And you guys nickname him Smiley? Y'all nickname him Smiley?
I call him Smiley. Yeah. He always had this like a shark,
Right. Wow. That's incredible.
I don't know if his name is on here or not. It says North Korean Lieutenant Colonel Chon Chung. So, anyway, another thing I've noticed it every time I was up in North Korean territory at the demilitarized zone and the military police and so on, they choose tall people as NPs, military police.
Right.
Tall people as, supposedly these are nurses and whatever, but they're all tall. And North Koreans are not tall people. So they choose, it's all a propaganda thing where they try to scare you. They never smile. Well, he's smiling here because the newspaper people are here, but the military police at the demilitarized zone, the North Koreans, they never smile, they growl. They wouldn't accept cigarettes from our soldiers or anything like that. No communication. They're all hardline type people. But that was an experience that, of course, I'll never forget.
A couple of other questions I wanted to ask. Did you receive any medals or honors for your service or the time as a photographer?
Well, I did win a photo contest. I submitted photos for the Army Far East photo contest, and I took, when I was on R&R, rest and recuperation, twice during my 16 months there. In Korea, I went to Tokyo twice, once in '55, once in '56, and went to a show, a musical, and took a photograph of some dancers, and it all came out blurry, but it looked good. And it was a surprise photo, and because it showed motion and so on, of this trio swirling around. And I've got a big photograph, a big copy of it at home. It's sort of dusty and cracked, but I still have it. But anyway, I submitted that and won first prize in that division.
Excellent.
It was, transparency division. But any case, what was the question?
Oh, that was it. Just if you had received any medals or honors
medals,
for your, for your photography.
No, I got the Good Conduct Medal.
Okay.
I always tell people that the reason I got a Good Conduct Medal is because I was never arrested in a bar fight.
And you were never wounded either, were you?
Well, I was wounded in a sense. I was about to. It's time for me to leave, and my colonel in charge at that time said, "Kasten, look, your replacement is here. Why don't you take off, take the Jeep, and go wherever you want to go for the day?" And I went down south. I went down to Busan. Now it's called Busan. And I took one or two photographs that you have of a fishing area with old wooden fishing boats and so on. Well, on the way back, by the time I went into small villages and so on, but on the way back, I was tired, and I'm riding in my open Jeep, and I'm coming up this hill, and I'm yawning. I yawned wide, and then something popped in my jaw, and when I got to the mess hall, or the sergeant's mess hall for eating, I couldn't. They gave a steak, and I couldn't bite into it without my jaw hurting. And it turns out that I had yawned so wide that I popped my jaw off the hinge.
Oh my goodness.
On one side. And I went into, not knowing what the problem was, I thought I had wisdom teeth or something, and I went into the dentist that we had in the 8th Army, in the clinic, and he said, I can't, he said, "You've got the thing up, off your hook here," and he tried to, it was very painful. He
I
said,
can't imagine.
"We're going to have to put you in the hospital." So I had to go down take the bus down to Incheon, the big United Nations hospital. They put me in the hospital, and they gave me anesthetic so I can be pliable, and they actually manipulated with a wire, hooked it in there, and then pulled the wire out, and so on.
Goodness.
And I woke up in a ward, and everybody in the ward had a broken jaw.
Oh my gosh.
They all had their head taped, and some of them were sipping their food
Through a
from a straw. And so there was a fellow that came with his clipboard, and he was a safety officer, and he wanted to know what happened in the fight. And he would not believe that I yawned, and that's how
Oh my gosh.
I ended up with my jaw wasn't broken, but they had to tape it to
Right.
keep it for a while until it healed, where they had pulled the wire through. And so he would come each day and interview people and find out about the fight that they were in. All these other fellows were in fights, in bar rooms, and got their jaws broken.
Right,
and so on.
right.
And I thought it was over, and then I got back to 8th Army headquarters, and one day the fellow walked in again while I was getting my stuff ready to pack out and ship out. And he wanted to know the truth. What really happened? Because he wouldn't
I'm
believe
trying
me.
to tell you.
And I kept telling him I just yawned. And that's what happened.
Well, a couple of other questions that we're going to ask to wrap things up. Returning back from the war, what year were you finally released?
Well, I left Korea in October, I think, of '56.
Okay.
So I had 2 winters in Korea, and they measure your time in Korea by winters, whether it was wartime or not. because the winters there is the cold comes down from the north, from Mongolia and Manchuria, and it comes down North Korea and comes into the south. And of course now it's all South Korea is all modernized with you know, all these buildings and high rises and so on. But if you're out in the field, I mean, the winters can get pretty cold there. So I was there 2 winters.
Okay. Okay. When you came back home, how were you received by your family and your community?
Well, you know, the war had been over for quite a while, so this wasn't like coming back from the war.
Right.
And it was just, you know, like getting out of the Army, and they had offered me, well, if you re-enlist, you'll get another stripe, you know, and so on, you know, offered me to, I said, well, I've got the Korean education bill now, and I think I couldn't go to college before, I didn't have the money.
Okay.
And so I think I'll try to go to college.
So that's what you used your GI Bill for, was to go to college?
Well, when I first got out, I did put an ad in a professional photographers magazine in New York City, and I did get a call and an offer. I went for an interview with this fellow who had a studio in Connecticut, nearby Connecticut, and he was an elderly fellow, and I think he was looking for someone who he can train and work with for a period of time and then try to sell the business to.
Okay.
And I really, you know, there's a possibility, but I thought, you know, if I don't try going to college, I'll never know whether, you know, I didn't really have high hopes that I would do well, because I've been a dropout. I wasn't very good at math, you know, in that area. And so, but I said to myself, you know, that, you know, it's an opportunity. I might try it. I can always back out, you know, and come back to this. And if not with him, with someone else. So that's what I did, and I stuck with it. So.
Do you feel like the skills that you attained from your experiences in Korea helped you when you were in college? Did you feel, I mean...
Oh, not only that, but they've helped me ever since. When I was in college, I started at the University of Houston. I worked for the school paper as a photographer, and also had part-time work as a photographer. Then I transferred to the University of Texas in Austin, and I was a photographer at the Daily Texan, and I had a part-time job. This was not a GI Bill. The World War II GI Bill paid for everything. The Korean Bill only paid for your books and your school. They did not pay for your food or your room.
Okay.
So I had to have money, you know, from somewhere, and I worked. So I had 2 part-time jobs, and both in photography. And then during the summers, when I was teaching in the 60s, I had a summer job with the National Park Service in 1960 in Rocky Mountain National Park, and I was a ranger, but I was also their photographer and writer.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I retired in 1990 from teaching, and I went into freelance photojournalism. And so I've taken photographs for Associated Press in Dallas, the Dallas Morning News, other local papers, before they were gobbled up by the Dallas Morning News. And I don't know about the Allen paper, and I don't think I took pictures. I took pictures in Frisco, and I don't remember if I took pictures for an Allen paper. What's the Allen paper name?
Allen America. It was
I don't
Allen
think
American.
I did. I don't think I did.
Right.
But in any case, photography is always still with
It's
me.
never, right, it's still in there. And have you revisited Korea since you left?
The folks that were served in the war, they're entitled to a heavy discount for a trip back to Korea that the Korean government pays for.
Okay.
They pay for part of it, but once you're in Korea, they pay for your hotel, and maybe they pay for part of your airfare. They pay for most of it. They're very good to the Americans and United Nations troops who fought to save their lives. But it's not the money so much as that it's all changed. I saw the poster for the Olympics when they were held in Seoul, and it showed Seoul with these high-rise buildings and these freeways that had 3 levels up in the sky and so on. I wouldn't recognize anything. And I mean, I glory in how they've become so successful and advanced, but I would never recognize it. Even photographs that I've seen at Panmunjom, at the True Site, they've changed things up there too. You can take tour buses that go up there with the tourists. When I was there, none of the military could bring their wives or whatever, and they're leaving there. They have villages, they have schools there for service people and so on. It's all changed. I just wouldn't recognize it. I mean, I really don't have that desire.
Okay. What were some of the life lessons that you feel you learned from the military service?
Try it. Try something. Try whatever the challenge is. Try it. You never know what might happen. If you didn't try it. If I hadn't said, "Oh yeah, I was a VIP photographer,"
Right.
What would have happened if I didn't say that?
Right. You could have been the guy developing.
I could have been, I don't know where.
Right.
But someone else could have gotten it or something. I don't know. Or if I decided not to go to college, not to try that.
Right.
I mean, some people may feel comfortable, just staying in their little box, or something, and not trying anything. But I always found it, in my case anyway, that more positive than negative came out of it.
That's excellent. Has your military service impacted your feelings about the war and the military in general?
Well, it's made me obviously more knowledgeable. Anyone who has personal experience. I belong to 2 veterans organizations, the Korean War veterans and the Jewish War veterans. Jewish War veterans were formed 1896 as the first, it's the longest existing veterans organization that we have. But anyway, and I've learned from some of those folks. We have people that, we still have some World War II people and whatever, and we don't sit around telling war stories.
No. Mm-hmm.
We primarily try to help the new veterans at the VA hospital and so on, in different ways. But anyway, it's it's experience. My brothers, my older brothers, they never really talked much about their experiences. I don't talk about it. You ask me the questions, I'll talk about it, but I don't go around talking about it. I just, I didn't serve it during the war.
Right.
They did. Now, one brother who happened to be stationed in the States all the time. He never went overseas. But, that was his job. He was to patrol and search the Gulf of Mexico for German submarines. And so, which was needed. But in any case, I just feel that it was a worthwhile experience. It's a valuable part of my life.
Absolutely. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear this interview?
Well, I just think positive, and I don't know how it might benefit you to know. Maybe it will give you some thoughts, depending upon your situation, about your life, that perhaps when things don't look too well, like in my situation as an adolescent, I was down, and I never spoke about my weight. I used to weigh 270 pounds and was bullied and so on. I mean, I don't want to get into that, but that there's ways, to get out of things and improve your life. But you've got to, sometimes people try to help you, and that's good, and if they don't, you're going to have to go help yourself.
Absolutely. Is there anything else, Jerry, that we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
No, I mean, every photograph that I've taken has some sort of a story, but I do want to go home and go to bed.
Okay.
So, talk and talk, but